Well, very good evening to you folks watching tonight. Thanks so much for joining us for another Ask the Attorney segment. This is season 2, episode 4 of Ask the Attorney with our wonderful estate planning attorney here in Northern Michigan, Mary Ann Wehr. Mary Ann, once again, thanks so much for being here tonight.
Oh, you're so welcome, and thank you for having me. You know, as better than anyone, how much I enjoy this. I enjoy bringing messages and information to people who are viewing this, and I'm really excited about tonight.
We do have a special guest. So before we bring her in, I want to remind folks watching that if you have any questions at any point for Mary Ann or for our guest, be sure to leave a comment. We can take pauses here and there between our conversation to answer some of your questions. So just a quick reminder that, again, this is called Ask the Attorney. So if you have any questions, we are here. Well, Mary Ann and our guest are here to answer them. I cannot answer any of your questions. But without further ado, let's bring in our guest tonight. And Mary Ann, I will have you introduce her.
Absolutely. Everyone, this is Brooke Stevens. And Brooke has become a very quick friend of mine. She's an amazing person. She works at Reynolds Jonkhoff. She's a funeral pre-planner. And the truth is, as a pre-planning consultant, there's just a lot of crossover between my clients and Brooke's clients. And so we find that we can help one another and help our clients best in this collaborative environment. So without further ado, I guess I should say, I'm so proud to introduce Brooke. And Brooke, thank you again for joining us tonight. Your topic is one that often comes up in my office. And people are like, I know I need to do that. We're going to do that next. And I say, do it. I've done it. And it was a great experience. Right?
Yeah. And your line of work, again, comes up at our office too. So, I work with a lot of people who are just in that point in their life where they're making plans and making sure they have things in order. And so certainly estate planning and pre-planning for final wishes goes hand in hand. And, I think the people who we are working with kind of say the same thing about both of our worlds. I'll get to it later, right? It's something easy to put off. And so, Mary Ann and I are always encouraging people, don't put it off, get it done. And then you don't have to worry about it anymore. So that's a good thing.
So Brooke, can you start just by telling us what exactly does Oh, sorry, Mary Ann. I was just curious, what exactly does a pre-planning do?
Yeah.
Delay there.
So I really do what a funeral director would do at the time of someone's death, but I do it ahead of time. And so I'm able to do it in a more comfortable setting. I'm able to do it in a way that is people giving it forethought as opposed to people making impulse decisions at a really horrible time when people are grieving and stressed. And there are so many benefits to being able to do this process ahead of time and have really a good amount of time to think about it and ask family how they feel. And so I work with people a lot of times kind of between 60 and 80 years old, some a little older, some a little younger. And, we put together a really good plan and talk about all the different options available to them. And it's just a really great experience. I really have people who hesitate to come in and do this work ahead of time. But I almost always have people leave saying, that was not as hard as we thought it was. And we're so grateful that we did it. So, and yeah, Mary Ann and her husband, Wayne, I was so proud to help them with their plans. And I think Wayne, certainly, you knew a little about this world, but I think Wayne certainly left feeling like, I'm glad we did that.
I would agree. And, the peace of mind that came along with it was amazing. And I remember my husband's face when I said, we're going to go meet with Brooke. Who's Brooke? And when I told him, he's like, we are, huh? Well, I think he enjoyed the experience as much or more than I did. And you watched us learning about each other.
Yeah.
Things We've been married 40 years. Not a lot to, you think not a lot to learn, right? But what I loved about the process of the pre-planning activity was we made our own decisions, not leaving it to our children or our relatives to scratch their head at a very tough time and say, I don't know, what do you think she would have liked? What do you think she wanted? And having those conversations of, oh no, she wouldn't want that. Oh yeah, I'm sure she would want that. She told me that. Oh no, she told me, so that's another moment where families in grief can collide. And by doing the pre-planning, just like the estate planning, it takes a lot of that collision out, because I still contend families in such deep grief, it's anxiety that's speaking when conflict occurs. I really believe that.
Yeah. And I would say that I'm a pretty frugal person, but I would say that we are making more financially sound decisions by doing it ahead of time, because we're not making decisions on impulse and in our grief. And so we have time to really think about it. And so, if people are really frugal and trying to work in a budget, I think pre-planning it is really helpful in that regard too.
It's interesting. It sounds like the impacts of pre-planning a funeral and the impacts of having an estate plan go hand in hand. They're very similar.
They tie together very closely. Again, the same age people are coming in to see me very often, 60 to 80. And sometimes earlier, younger than that. I would like to see, as Maya, people much, much younger when they have young families. But it's a very time in your life, you're retiring, or maybe you've retired for a while and you're just saying, you know what? Maybe you just went through the death of a parent. I don't want my kids to go through that. I don't want them to go through it either on the estate side or the funeral side. And that's just a really good place for people to be, because they're thinking about it. They're thinking about, there is no promise of tomorrow.
Right.
I think much of our lives will go through that, believing there is. So,
and as
it's a
far
great
as a
experience.
pre-plan at the funeral home, there's no cost to pre-plan. I sit down with people and we create a plan, and I can give them an estimate of what their plans will cost. But that process of pre-planning, we do for families. The reason we don't charge to do that is because we would plan people's services one way or another. We're either going to do it when they pass at a stressful time, or we're going to do it ahead of time when it's much easier. So we're not going to charge extra to do it ahead of time. And so, thinking about the fact that there's no cost for this, I'm a big believer that everybody should do this. There's just no reason to not have a plan in place. And that way, if something unexpected happens, something tragic, an illness that's unexpected, these days you hear a lot about dementia and Alzheimer's, and all of a sudden decision-making capabilities are decreased. And so having this done ahead of time before any of those sorts of things happen, and the reality is we don't know when any of those things would happen. And it's not just something that happens to people who are between 60 and 80, right?
That's right. That's exactly it. And Brooke, my eyes were open. I mean, I'm a lawyer. People think I know all of the laws, right? I don't. I was surprised to learn that by law, a funeral home needs to be involved in your planning.
Yeah.
Needs to be up in your funeral.
Yeah, I talk to people a lot about, doing pre-planning. And of course, one of the things I hear often is, I'm just going to be cremated. I don't need a funeral home. But the reality is that to go to a crematory, to go to a cemetery, to go to a medical school for anatomical donation, for any of those things, you have to go to a funeral service provider first. And the funeral service provider does all of the appropriate paperwork and authorizations. They care for the family, they care for the deceased, but there's really no way around having a funeral service provider And a lot of people don't understand that. They think that, I don't want to have a big fancy service, so I don't need a funeral home. I work with a lot of people who want direct cremation. And there's a lot of things that go along with people tend to always say to me, just cremation. I just want cremation. That there's not any just. I mean, I don't feel like I'm a salesperson. My job is to create a plan for people that will serve their needs, a plan that will help both the family at the time and the funeral director to get through that time. And I want to do whatever plan it is that suits you best. And if that is direct cremation, then that's what we're going to do. But there are things that come along with direct cremation, even that, Mary Ann, just as an attorney, one of the big things is a cremation authorization at the time of someone's death. That has to be signed by, or your cremation has to be authorized by more than 50% of your next of kin. And so, if you have a spouse and your spouse predeceases you, you are 100% of your spouse's next of kin. But if you pass together with your spouse, or you aren't married at the time of your death, then your children, more than 50% of your children, are who would have to authorize your cremation. So if you have 3 children, that's 2 of them. We run in a lot these days, Mary Ann, I'm sure you do too, with people who are maybe estranged from their children.
Right.
Or their children are overseas and not easily accessible to them to communicate with on a regular basis. And so in those situations, there's kind of only one way around that next of kin rule, and that is to designate a funeral representative. And so I meet with a lot of people who that becomes a really important part of their direct cremation is, I'm not in contact with my next of kin, and or I'm estranged from them and I don't want them involved in my plans. And so if for no other reason, people who are planning for a direct cremation, I really like them to know about that and to be able to get ahead of that curve and not be surprised, not have estranged family members called at the time, surprised that they have this responsibility to authorize cremation for someone that, they are estranged from, or, whatever the case may be. So yeah, a funeral service provider is really required, and for any form of disposition, and it's really important. And there's a lot of things to think about. It's so much better to do it ahead of time.
You mentioned the funeral representative. Now, that's actually a legal form that I do, and I think many estate planning attorneys do, as a part of their full strategic estate plan for folks. But if someone comes into your office doing some pre-planning, you'll have them sign one as well, won't you?
Yes. So we can do that legal paperwork with our families. And Mary Ann, that is something that a lot of you are doing now, but really just within the last couple of years.
Oh, really?
And so, prior to, I don't know, maybe I feel like I lost 2 years during COVID, right? But maybe 5 years ago or something, it was that we didn't have that option. It was just next of kin. And so anybody that has estate plans and wills, things like that were done prior to a couple of years ago, it's likely that the designated funeral representative portion didn't come up in the conversation with an attorney. Okay. So yes, we're really grateful now that you are adding that as part of estate plans and wills. But yeah, if anyone has something that was done prior to a couple of years ago, it's likely that was not included.
So that's very interesting, because when I talk to like my clients and say, okay, who would you like to represent you with your funeral arrangements, and kind of carrying that piece of the burden for you, or making sure that your wishes are brought forth in your funeral. Oftentimes I have people look at each other like, okay, we're taking a step a little further than I expected, I guess, And I explain, there have been case studies where you mentioned an estranged son or daughter hasn't been in their life for 10 or 15 years. So sisters or brothers take over the responsibility, plan the whole funeral, and suddenly crops up the estranged son who is like, wait a minute, stop everything, stop the presses.
Yeah.
And he really is the person who legally, without the funeral representative, like the sister or brother could have been assigned, but if they weren't, that estranged son really is the person that's responsible, right?
Yeah. And I think, the reason for this rule, a lot of people ask me that, why can't I just tell you right now I want cremation? Right. Well, we don't know what happens when you leave this funeral home. And so if you are about to pass and all of a sudden the thought of cremation terrifies you, you may say to your family, I know I chose cremation, but please bury me. I really am feeling strongly that I want to be buried now. So if it didn't work the way that it does, where next of kin or a designated funeral rep has to make that call at the time, then if a family were told that by a dying loved one and the family came to the funeral home and said, we know they have a cremation plan, but they don't want to be buried, we'd have to say, well, too bad. So the law is in place for a really good reason, because a lot can happen from the time someone does a pre-plan until they pass. And so we trust that the next of kin, or in their place, a designated funeral representative, is really the one that knows what their wishes are at the moment that they pass. Yeah.
Oh, I'm learning so much already. I just kind of sat back there for a couple minutes and let you two have a conversation. And I'm like, I didn't know any of this. So I think one of the most important things that I took from the past couple of minutes is, no matter what the situation is and what you want after you pass, you do need a funeral home, no matter what, at the time of death.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
So going off of that, what else can family members expect when a loved one does pass?
Yeah. So I get this question a lot. We have people who, maybe someone is on hospice, maybe they have a loved one that's had a diagnosis and they know that they have a terminal illness. There's just a lot of anxiety at that time. And so people kind of want to know what happens if they die at home, or what happens if they die with hospice. And I can't speak highly enough of hospice programs for families. I refer a lot of people to them, and we have some really great hospice programs in our area. But if someone were to pass at home, a family member should always call 911. And someone with the EMS service would be able to pronounce someone deceased at home. Of course, if you pass at the hospital or a nursing home, the staff there can pronounce someone deceased. And then if you have hospice has kind of its own set of protocol when someone passes, regardless of where that happens. So once someone has been pronounced deceased, the funeral home of choice will be called. And when a family is ready, we will bring someone into our care here. And at that time, we will let the family know when their loved one has arrived safely at the funeral home. And again, speaking for our funeral home, this is how that works at Reynolds Jonkhoff. And then at that point, they would be asked to come in and meet with a funeral director and to really finalize plans. And so if you have a pre-plan, that's easy, right? It's really just reviewing those details and choosing dates for services, and just kind of updating some things, and based on the circumstances of death, maybe making some changes. But if you don't have a pre-plan, it's starting from scratch, and it's really giving us all of the information that is needed at the time. So information for a death certificate, to notify Social Security, to help families with an obituary, for us to know who their next of kin is, for us to know if they have any churches involved, or if there's going to be any cemeteries involved. And that's kind of just the beginning part. There's much more specific things like burial or cremation. There's really lots of different options in that regard. Burial, cremation, green burial is available in our area. We get a lot of questions about green burial. Anatomical donation is something we get a lot of questions about, and that would be donating your body to science. And there are medical schools in our state that allow for that. And one of the most recent things, and we're actually really proud to be one of the first funeral homes in the state of Michigan, actually, to partner with a company called Return Home for terramation services, or what a lot of people are seeing in the news as human composting is what that's called. It isn't done in our state yet, but we are partnering with an organization where we will be able to provide services for families desiring that. And so there'll be more information coming out about that. That's a really recent thing. But so decisions about, which of those options you would choose for your loved one. And then, will there be gatherings? Will there be luncheons? What newspapers would have obituaries in it? How many death certificates would a family need to handle financial affairs? There's just really a lot of things that don't meet the eye that, doing this pre-plan can help you think about. And if it's the time of someone's passing and those things haven't been thought about, then they have to be thought about at that time. And it's just much more difficult.
And again, I think it's very nice if you can plan your own. So your family doesn't have to wonder. And just as I shared coming in, when my husband and I did this planning, I learned so much about Wayne, about what his, I was like, really? So there's examples of, had I been doing this at the moment of your death, we wouldn't have done that. And that would make me sad to know that that's what you would have liked.
Yeah, I remember in our conversation, you being surprised at some of the things that he said. And it was neat to see the two of you reacting that way. And you're not the only ones. A lot of times couples are surprised. But, I think a lot of people try to have these conversations at home. Right. And they just barely scratch the surface. And I think they tend to talk in circles, we're going to do this and we're going to do that. And then what are we going to do about this? And then, they can't really make a decision. And so they stop talking about it for a while and get back to it. And it's just kind of this circular motion where when you sit down with somebody who knows all your options and has a lot of experience in helping people get through that process, it's much easier to get through. It happens much quicker and you don't end up getting stuck along the way.
You talked about our fields being so similar in mindset. I could have just said the very same thing, right? I mean, I could have, because it is difficult, and you try, it's like you're running with scissors at home, and you can't come to the conclusion always. And even I have clients who come in, talk, have more information, go back out, and so there's a lot of that's not the common, but it is. You can tell it's a lot of work for people, but not the common. I'm not trying to scare people away like, oh, you're going to be coming in for months. But no, I just think that there's so much similarity, as you spoke earlier, of easy to put off, right? Because I don't want to make those decisions. I don't want to think about that. Mm-hmm. And I know for us, it's, I don't want to think about you without me.
Exactly.
And that really what it boils down to for me. I don't want to think about the people who love me without me.
Yeah. I think people think this is a really emotional process to pre-plan. And I will tell you that that is not my experience. I've been doing this for a lot of years, and that is just not my experience. The appointments that I have with families are not emotional. They are, we talk about facts. We talk about the way people think about services at the time of someone's death. We talk about family traditions. I know people think that it's a very hard emotional conversation. But in a pre-planning setting, it really isn't. It's the at need, not having things in place when everyone is already emotional. That's when it's the harder, discussion.
Right. Yep. Yeah. And again, Brooke, you mentioned that if people do want to pre-plan, that's a service that you offer for free. Of course, a lot of the other services that come later on aren't free, but can people pay ahead of time?
Yeah. Yep. So so I do two things with people. I do pre-planning, and we've talked a lot about that creating that file, gathering that information, drafting a plan. Um, Once we've drafted that plan, then I'm able to do an estimate for someone so that they have an idea of what the cost of their specific plans will be. Um, I have a lot of people who call the funeral home and say, "Oh, I just want a price for cremation. Can you just tell me how much cremation will be?" And the reality is that, again, all those things that we talked about play into that estimate. And so um, I can have 3 appointments in one day, and all of them want cremation. And it's going to have a very wide range of estimates, anywhere from $4,000 to $12,000. I mean, I know that sounds like a ridiculous range, but it all depends on products chosen and obituaries and services, luncheons. Just there's so many different things. But once we have that estimate, then we can talk a little bit about pre-funding, and there are options for pre-funding. And there are manageable payment plans available. And there are some real benefits to doing that through a funeral home. One of which was we agreed to lock costs in at today's rates. So, if you are 30 years old today and you did a pre-plan and you live until you're 80 years old, you're paying prices from that long ago. And, it makes it an inflation proof plan, if you will. And so there's very few other things you can buy that will guarantee that the price isn't going to go up over time. So that's a real benefit of doing that through a funeral home. But there are lots of ways to make sure, that the ultimate goal is met, and that is that there isn't any sort of a financial burden at the time for your family. We talk a lot about life insurance. We talk a lot about investments. We talk a lot about cash on hand, people with their mattress stuffed. But so there's lots of different ways to do that. And I'm really grateful to sit with people and help talk through that, again, with the ultimate goal of making sure there's no financial burden for their family. I can tell you that when services are pre-funded and a grieving family is meeting with a funeral director, that funeral director being able to say at the end of that appointment, "You don't need to worry about the money. It's already pre-funded." The sigh of relief at that point for a family is really special. And so that makes doing this just a really great gift.
That is one thing that drew Wayne and I, right, is to make sure that we were keeping financial burden off our family. Mm-hmm. And prepaying. And I have to tell you, you were able to show us what a funeral might be in estimates, but might be in 15 years, might be in 30 years. And comparing today's price to maybe 30 years from now, which we all hope will live at least another 30 years. Right. It was eye-opening. It was really eye-opening. And so, I don't know, it was just a great experience, truly.
Good. I'm glad.
Yeah.
I have a feeling we could continue this conversation all night, but we are running out of time. So both Brooke and Mary Ann, what are your last final words that you want people to know about pre-planning when it comes to a funeral?
Yeah, just that there's so much more to it than meets the eye. There's anywhere between 75 and 125 details that a funeral director has to know about somebody at the time of death. And it's a lot. It's a lot on a good day. On a bad day, it's just really hard for families. So you may think that you've made the decision for cremation or you've made the decision for burial and that's all you need to do. But there is so much more that needs to be addressed, and even some legal things that really need to be considered ahead of time. I'm just really passionate about the option of having these plans in place. I'm grateful my parents have their plans in place, and I have 2 brothers, and I know at the time of my parents' death, we just have to pull that plan out and make it happen. It's been refunded, so my brothers and I don't have to look at each other and go, "Who's going to pay this?" you know. So they're just Dan Yonkhoff used to say all the time to people, "We've never had anyone come back and say, 'Gosh, I wish my parents didn't pre-plan.'" And Dan retired now, but I have to say that since he retired, I have never heard anyone say that as well. So there's really no downfall to doing it, in my opinion. I can't really find a reason not to.
And I would just add that I think both Brooke and I have seen the impact of putting it off until you can't do it, putting it off until it's too late. So whether it's an estate plan or whether it's pre-planning, it is heartbreaking. We have shared conversations with one another, not specific stories about people, but conversations about how heartbreaking it is to see a person who just kept kicking the can down the road until there was no more road. And that goes for both estate planning and pre-planning. Just so important. It's hard for me to see a family come in when maybe Brooke mentioned dementia, when maybe one of the spouses has dementia now and there was never a plan. So to even help them medically, the probate court has to come into play for, conservatory or guardianship. So there's nothing more heartbreaking than to see a family that waited so long until all of it all comes crashing down. So don't wait would be my message. Yeah.
The best time to pre-plan is when you don't need it.
I get it.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
Great advice, ladies. Brooke, Mary Ann, thanks so much for providing all this very valuable information to our viewers. I think it is very appreciated. And Mary Ann, I do have your contact information in our description. So if anyone watching right now wants to reach out to Mary Ann, her website and her phone number are in the description. Brooke, if anyone wants to reach out to you, how can they do that?
I will get my email address and the phone number at Reynolds Jonkhoff Funeral Home to you. If you can post that in there as well, that would be great. But certainly calling Reynolds Jonkhoff, asking for me. Again, my name is Brooke Stevens, and I'd be happy to help anybody that is interested in getting that pre-planning process started.
Well, again, Brooke, thanks so much for joining us on Ask the Attorney. Mary Ann, always a pleasure to have you as well. And thank you folks so much for watching. We will see you soon on our next Ask the Attorney segment. Take care, everyone.
Bye-bye now.